In Chapter 10, we are going to look at how to motivate employees. A one-size-fits-all approach to managing and motivating employees has never been effective. The forces that affect motivation can vary widely from person to person and from situation to situation. The various theories and models in this chapter provide some insight into the complicated questions of employee motivation. I want you to think about what you think the number one motivator for employees is. Many times when I ask this question live in class, the answer is money. However, if it was money, how do you explain someone who quits a high-paying job to take a lesser-paying job, or someone who chooses to work when their spouse makes plenty of money? As I stated before, in this chapter, we are going to explore various motivational theories. Motivation refers to the combination of forces that drive individuals to take certain actions and avoid others in pursuit of personal objectives. There are two types of rewards that we're going to talk in terms in this chapter. They are intrinsic rewards and extrinsic rewards. The word intrinsic means from within. This is when you have a drive to succeed and are motivated by purpose, passion, and mission. Intrinsic rewards are something that employees give to themselves. Examples of these type of rewards are having pride in your performance as well as a sense of achievement. Extrinsic rewards, on the other hand, is something given as recognition of good work. In other words, these are rewards that are given by other people, such as pay raises, promotions, and awards. This slide displays the most common perks and rewards used by companies to motivate employees. Other examples of extrinsic rewards include the following, things such as pay, improved working conditions, status, and security. While these rewards do offer some value, there is much research that indicates many problems with extrinsic motivation. Some of these are that extrinsic rewards do not produce permanent changes, and reinforcement of extrinsic rewards can lead to expectations of performance in the form of job rewards. So for example, once you have a 5% 401k match, research shows that that then doesn't become a motivating factor because you're used to receiving that. It's not something new anymore. I want you to take a minute to think about whether you work harder or differently when your boss is around. If you do, then take a minute and think about why that is. The Hawthorne studies were conducted in Cicero, Illinois at the Western Electric plant over a 6-year period. The research began as an experiment testing the effects of various levels of light for one group of workers, known as the experimental group, and kept it at the same level for a second group, which was the control group. Both groups were engaged in tedious task of wrapping wire to make telephone coils, so lighting presumably played a key role in eye strain and other factors influencing productivity. In other words, they studied worker efficiency under different levels of light. What they found is that productivity increased regardless of light condition. That is, it didn't matter if the light levels increased or decreased. The researchers ultimately determined that this was a psychological effect. In other words, people were behaving differently because they knew they were being watched. Psychologist Abraham Maslow hypothesized that behavior is determined by a variety of needs, which he organized into categories arranged in a hierarchy. The most basic needs are at the bottom of this hierarchy, while the more advanced needs are towards the top. On this slide, we're going to discuss Maslow's theory of motivation, which is known as the hierarchy of needs theory. All of the requirements for basic survival, things such as food, shelter, and water, fall into the lowest level, which is the category of physiological needs. Sorry, it's physiological, not psychological needs. These basic needs must be satisfied before the person can consider higher level needs such as safety needs, which is the need to feel safe, for example, from harm while at work, social needs, which is the need to give and feel a sense of belonging, and esteem needs, which is the need for a sense of self-worth and integrity. At the top of the hierarchy is self-actualization, which I always tell students to think of the slogan for the Army, which is "Be all you can be." This is truly the need to become everything that one is able to become. This need is also the most difficult to fulfill. Employees who reach this point of work, they do so not just because they want to make money or impress others, but because they feel like their work is worthwhile and they find the work itself satisfying. To summarize Maslow's theory of motivation, needs that have already been met do not motivate. And if a need is filled, another higher level need emerges. Sorry, but I want to be very clear that you cannot have social needs if you have not first satisfied your safety and physiological needs, right? So they are progressive, they are in order. You have to first reach your physiological needs, and then your safety needs, social needs, and so on. Now let's relate Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the work environment. Workers require competitive salaries, benefits, and clean work environments, which would fall under the physiological needs, which remember are the basic needs. You need to make enough to feed your family and pay for shelter. Employees have the need for security against termination in their jobs and the feeling of being safe, as I mentioned before, from bodily harm while performing the job functions. On the job, workers have the need to feel a part of a successful group driven by achievement, and honestly, the need to have friends as well. Employees seek opportunities for advancement, empowerment, recognition, and responsibility through additional work-related performances, which are related to both esteem and self-actualization needs. And finally, self-actualization. As I mentioned before, this is when somebody feels like they've reached their full potential. On this slide, we are going to talk about Herzberg's two-factor theory. Herzberg's research centered on two questions: what causes satisfaction and what causes dissatisfaction. He found that two entirely different set of factors were associated with dissatisfying experiences and satisfying experiences. Hygiene factors are associated with dissatisfaction and do not motivate employees. Motivators, on the other hand, are associated with satisfaction and can indeed increase motivation. Hygiene factors are mostly extrinsic and include items related to the job environment. These include items such as working conditions, pay policies, company policies, and job security. Meanwhile, motivators tend to be intrinsic and include job content items such as achievement, recognition, and responsibility. This slide gives examples, many of which we discussed on the previous slide, of both motivators and hygiene factors. Remember, according to Herzberg, hygiene factors such as working conditions and company policies can influence employee dissatisfaction. So what that means is even if you improve these, employees may become less dissatisfied, but changing somebody's pay is not going to immediately make them a satisfied employee. On the other hand, motivators such as opportunities for achievement and recognition can and do influence employee satisfaction and therefore increase motivation. Next, we're going to talk about Theory X and Theory Y. In the 1960s, Douglas McGregor proposed Theory X and Theory Y. These are a set of assumptions that underline most management thinking. He believed that Theory X-oriented managers believed that workers dislike work and they seek to avoid it. They must be forced or threatened with punishment to get them to perform. They prefer to be directed and avoid responsibility, and that primary motivators, as I mentioned before, are fear and punishment. And these are examples, if you remember, of extrinsic rewards. On the other hand, he said that theory Y-oriented managers believe that people actually do like to work. Workers seek goals to which they are committed, and that commitment to a goal depends on the perceived rewards, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, and that people are motivated by a variety of rewards, but that it's important that managers consider to motivate through those intrinsic rewards we talked about previously. Management by objectives, often called MBO, is an example of how we can apply how goal setting can help us achieve our objectives. Peter Drucker, who was a well-known management guy in industry, and he conducted a lot of studies, developed the idea of management by objectives in his 1954 book, The Practice of Management. Management by objectives involves a cycle of discussion, review, and evaluation of objectives among managers, supervisors, and employees. One of the key elements of MBO is a collaborative goal-setting process. Together, a manager and employee define the employee's goals, the responsibility for achieving those goals, and the means of evaluating individual and group performance so that employees' activities are directly linked to achieving the organization's long-term goals. It's important when using MBO to monitor results and reward achievement. I want you to take a minute and think about what the benefits of MBO might be. It's important to know that this theory, in order to answer this question, right, this theory is based on the notion that setting attainable goals with all employees of the organization will create more support for the goals, leading to greater motivation. In other words, because employees at all levels are involved in all 4 steps, they learn more about the company objectives and feel that they are an important part of the company-wide team. Furthermore, they understand how their individual job functions contribute to the organization's long-term success. Next, let's look at expectancy theory. This theory connects an employee's efforts to the outcomes he or she expects from those efforts. It focuses less on the specific forces that motivate employees and more on the processes they follow to seek satisfaction in their jobs. As shown in the diagram here, the effort employees will put forth depends on the following things. First, do they believe they can accomplish the task? Second, what's the reward? And third, is the reward worth the effort? Let's explore these further. First, as an employee, if you don't believe that the amount of effort you are willing or able to apply to a task will result in an acceptable level of performance, a natural response may be, well, why would I bother, right? So if you don't even think you can complete the task as shown on this diagram, you're not going to be motivated. However, if the answer to the question, can you complete the task, is yes, you move on to the second question. So your second concern as an employee is whether the organization will recognize and reward your performance. Knowing you've done a great job is its own reward, of course, but for many employees, it's just not enough. As a manager, a challenge includes establishing a reward system, right? So first you have to just ask yourself, does the employee or does the organization reward you? And then you need to explore, is the reward worth it? So finally, if you're confident that your performance and the organization's response in regard to a reward is being available, your third concern is whether the promised reward is something that you personally value. So think about it this way, right? So if you don't care about the rewards, you're not going to be motivated. What happens if your job offers you a raise, but what you really want is an additional week of vacation? You might not be motivated, right? But if you decide that the reward is of value to you, then you will be motivated to complete the task. It's important to note here that expectations can and do vary from person to person, so it's important for organizations to know their employees as individuals. Next, let's look at reinforcement theory. This theory suggests that managers can motivate their employees by shaping their action through behavior modification. This is much like we treat kids when we want them to behave a certain way. Using reinforcement theory, managers try to systematically encourage those actions to be beneficial to the company. It's important to note that reinforcement can be positive or negative, and that in discussing this theory, both positive and negative reinforcement encourages behaviors to be repeated. The difference is how they do it. Positive reinforcement offers pleasant consequences for particular actions and behaviors, increasing the likelihood that the behaviors will be repeated. These include giving items such as praise and recognition, for example, saying "great job," and pay increases. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, also encourages a particular behavior to be repeated, but it does so through the reduction, removal, or absence of an unpleasant outcome. An example of negative reinforcement is, let's say on Monday morning, you leave the house early, which is the behavior, to avoid getting stuck in traffic and being late for work. If you notice in this example, you've removed the traffic, which is the adverse action, right? So because you left early, you get to avoid a negative consequence, which is heavy traffic. Next is punishment. This refers to actions used to diminish the repetition of unwanted behaviors by adding unpleasant outcomes. For example, if you continue to be late to work each morning, then you will be placed on a 90-day probation period, after which you may be terminated if the behavior continues. So when you use punishment, you're trying to stop negative behavior. And finally, extinction. For the purposes of this class, I want you to know that this is when you try to stop a behavior by ignoring it. Think of a child who is throwing a tantrum, and instead of responding to it, you ignore it, hoping that the tantrum will stop soon. Organizations use this with us as well, where they think if they ignore a problem behavior sometimes, it will go away on its own. Next, let's explore equity theory. Equity theory says that employees try to maintain equity between inputs and outputs compared to others in similar positions. I want you to think about something for a second. If you work side by side with someone doing the same job and giving the same amount of effort, only to learn that your colleague earns more money, how would that make you feel? Would your motivation increase or decrease? For most of us, it would decrease, which is why in most businesses it's against policy to share salary information. Equity theory suggests that employee satisfaction depends on the perceived ratio of inputs to outputs. People look to see if what they are doing is similar to what others around them are doing and whether things are treated fairly. To remedy a perception of inequity, people might ask for a raise, they might decide not to work as hard, or they may even quit and find a new job. The last slide for Chapter 10 looks at the job characteristics model, which explores the key characteristics of work. Listed here are 5 dimensions that are common in all jobs, regardless of the industry that they are in, that determine things such as motivation, performance, and other outcomes. The first is skill variety. This refers to the degree to which a job requires different skills and talents. Think of a job that requires a lot of different skills and talents and compare it with a job that is repetitive. This job characteristics theory states that a job having more variety and thus requiring more skill and talent will result in an employee feeling that they are doing more meaningful work and that therefore they will be more motivated. Next is task identity, which refers to the degree to which the tasks of the job are clearly identifiable and have a visible outcome. The theory states that an employee, if they understand what needs to be done, and they understand when they are finished and are able to see what they have created or the outcome that they have achieved, they will feel they are doing more meaningful work. Think of two workers who are part of a project to build an airplane. The first one is involved in only the initial project planning, whereas the second worker is involved right from the initial planning through when the first aircraft rolls off the production line. The theory states that it is the second worker who will find their work more meaningful because they are able to see the end product that they produced. Next is task significance. This refers to the degree to which the task has impact. Impact can mean a lot of different things. It could mean that the task has impact within the organization, or that it has impact on the bottom line, or even society as a whole. Let's think of another two employees, both part of a team building a website, right? So a software to use on a website. The first employee is responsible for the part of the system that interacts with the user, and the second one is responsible for ensuring that data is stored efficiently behind the scenes in the database. The job characteristics model would state that the first worker will find their work more meaningful because they're more likely to understand the impact on the end user. Autonomy refers to the degree of freedom an employee has to complete their work. It is the degree to which the employee is free to choose how to go about doing a specific task and the degree to which they can choose how to schedule their task. The job characteristic theory states that employees with more autonomy will have a greater sense of responsibility towards the results of their work and therefore do a better job. I don't think this is surprising to any of us if we think about how it feels to be micromanaged, which is somebody always over your shoulder telling you what to do and how to do it, versus having freedom to do the job that we know we are capable of doing. And finally, the last key characteristic of work discussed by the job characteristic model is feedback. Feedback refers to the degree to which the employee is kept informed about how well they are doing in their role. This theory states that more feedback leads to increased knowledge for the employee in the results of their work, so that good feedback results in higher self-esteem, which then in turn creates more productivity and more pride in what they do. If an employee receives negative feedback quickly, then this also provides them the opportunity to make adjustments and corrections to their work before any major consequences are experienced. This concludes Chapter 10. Please let me know if you have any questions.